Fleet Commander Varax Theln stepped off the transport shuttle and onto human soil for the first time. The air was thick and heavy compared to his homeworld. Gravity pulled at his tall frame with unusual force. Earth was a harsh planet, he had been told, but he had dismissed such warnings. The Volnorians had conquered dozens of worlds. One small blue planet held no mystery for him. He stood at 8 feet tall, his gray skin marked with the ceremonial scars of 100 successful campaigns. His 4 eyes scanned the landing platform with quiet contempt. Humans. Such small creatures. Such short lives. The Volnorian Dominion had watched them stumble into space barely 2 centuries ago, clumsy and loud like children learning to walk. Now they wanted to be treated as equals. The diplomatic exchange program had been Ambassador Cathral's idea. Build trust, he had said. Learn about each other. Varax knew the real purpose of his visit. The High Council wanted to know if humans were a threat. They wanted him to study the famous West Point Military Academy and return with an honest assessment. He already knew what his report would say. These creatures were not dangerous. They were merely loud. A human male approached him with a warm smile. He was small, like all humans, with brown skin and dark hair cut short in military fashion. He wore a crisp uniform decorated with symbols Varax did not recognize. Fleet Commander Varax Theln, the human said, extending his hand in that strange greeting custom. Welcome to Earth. I'm Commander Daniel Carter, head of alien relations here at the Academy. We're honored to have you. Varax looked at the extended hand for a moment before accepting it. The human's grip was firm, stronger than he expected. He released quickly. Thank you, Commander Carter, Varax said through his translator. I look forward to seeing your institution. Behind him, Sub-Commander Rilke stepped off the shuttle. She was younger than Varax, eager to prove herself, and she made no effort to hide her disdain for their hosts. She had argued against this mission from the beginning. A waste of time, she had called it. Varax was beginning to agree. Commander Carter led them across the platform toward a collection of old stone buildings. Varax had expected something modern, something impressive. Instead, he saw structures made of gray rock and red brick, standing among trees with leaves that were turning orange and gold. It looked ancient, primitive. The Academy was founded over 500 years ago, Carter explained as they walked. It has trained military officers continuously since then. Many of our greatest leaders studied within these walls. Varax stopped walking. 500 years? Your species has only been in space for 2 centuries. Carter nodded. That's correct. We were training soldiers long before we reached the stars. Long before we knew other species existed. This was unexpected. The Volnorian Military Academy was barely 3 centuries old, and it had been created specifically to manage their expanding empire. The idea that humans had been training warriors for 500 years, with no empire to protect and no alien enemies to fight, was strange. What had they been preparing for? Rilke leaned close to Varax and whispered in their native tongue. They were fighting each other, Commander. Primitive species always do. Varax nodded but said nothing. He had read the reports about human history. Endless wars among themselves. Brutal conflicts that killed millions. It was further proof of their barbaric nature. Civilized species did not slaughter their own kind. They passed through a large courtyard, where young humans in matching uniforms were engaged in physical training. Some ran in formation, their feet striking the ground in perfect rhythm. Others climbed ropes and walls with surprising speed. But it was a smaller group that caught Varax's attention, in a roped-off area. Pairs of humans were fighting each other with their bare hands. They struck and blocked, kicked and grappled, moving with practiced skill. Their faces were calm, focused, even as they delivered blows that would have injured lesser creatures. Vorax watched one young female throw a male twice her size onto his back. She pinned him there with a technique that bent his arm at an unnatural angle. Hand-to-hand combat training, Carter explained. All cadets learn multiple fighting styles during their time here. Vorax frowned. You have weapons that can destroy cities. Why do you train to fight with your bodies? Because weapons can fail, Carter said simply. They can be lost, broken, or taken away. A soldier who can only fight with a gun is helpless without it. We train our people to be dangerous with anything. Or nothing. Rilke made a sound of disgust. Barbaric, she muttered, but Vorax was no longer so sure. He watched the cadets more closely now. They were young, barely adults by human standards. Their movements were precise, efficient. There was no wasted energy, no wild emotion. They fought like predators, not prey. And when the training round ended, they helped each other up, nodded respectfully, and began again. What struck Vorax most was their eyes. Even the youngest among them had a certain look, a coldness beneath the surface. He had seen that look before, in veterans who had survived terrible battles. These were children who had never seen war, yet they carried themselves like soldiers who had seen too much of it. They continued the tour past more training grounds. Vorax saw cadets practicing with weapons, studying maps, running through obstacle courses that seemed designed to cause maximum suffering. Every activity was intense. Every face was serious. Even during their brief rest periods, the humans seemed alert, ready. Your cadets train very hard, Vorax observed. Carter nodded. The Academy's motto is duty, honor, country. We teach them that nothing worthwhile comes easy. Struggle builds strength. Hardship builds character. And what happens to those who cannot endure the training? They leave, Carter said. No shame in it. This life isn't for everyone. But those who stay, those who make it through. He paused and looked at Vorax with an expression that was almost challenging. They become something more than they were. Vorax wanted to dismiss this as arrogance, but he found he could not. There was something in this place, something in these humans, that unsettled him in ways he could not name. They were small and weak and short-lived. Their technology was inferior to Volnorian standards. By every measure, they should be insignificant. Yet as he watched a group of cadets march past, their eyes forward and their steps perfectly synchronized, Vorax felt the first small seed of doubt take root in his mind. Commander. Carter stopped at the edge of the courtyard and turned to face him. You seem troubled, Fleet Commander. Is something wrong? Vorax considered the question carefully before answering. I was told humans were soft, fragile. I was told you were a young species still learning your place in the galaxy. Carter smiled, but there was no warmth in it. And what do you think now? Vorax looked back at the training grounds, at the young humans who fought and bled and smiled and fought again. I think, he said slowly, that I would like to learn more. Then let me show you our history, Carter said. That's where the real lessons are. He gestured toward a large building at the far end of the courtyard. Vorax followed, and as he walked, he could not shake the feeling that he had made a serious error in judgment. These humans were not what he had expected. They were not what anyone had expected, and that, he was beginning to realize, might be very dangerous indeed. The building Commander Carter led them to was old, older than anything Vorax had seen on other human worlds. Its walls were made of heavy stone, and its entrance was guarded by statues of humans in ancient military uniforms, holding weapons from another era. Above the doorway, carved into the rock, were words in the human language. Vorax's translator rendered them as, "Lest we forget." Inside, the air was cool and quiet. Their footsteps echoed on polished floors. The walls were covered with paintings and photographs showing humans in various states of war. Some images were so old they had faded to brown. Others were sharp and clear, showing battles fought on distant worlds Varax recognized. A young human female met them in the entrance hall. She wore the cadet uniform and stood at perfect attention until Carter introduced her. "Fleet Commander, this is Cadet Lisa Monroe. She'll be your guide through our memorial hall and historical archives." Cadet Monroe was small even by human standards. Her hair was pulled back tightly, and her face showed no emotion. She nodded to Varax with practiced politeness. "It is an honor to meet you, Fleet Commander," she said. "Please follow me." Rilke moved close to Varax as they walked. "A child giving us a history lesson," she whispered in their language. How insulting. But Varax had learned to be careful with his assumptions. He followed Cadet Monroe without complaint. The first room they entered was filled with artifacts from ancient human wars. Swords and spears, shields and armor, all displayed behind protective barriers. Monroe explained each era briefly, pointing to maps that showed how human nations had risen and fallen over thousands of years. "Humans have been fighting organized wars for at least 5,000 years, she said. "Before that, tribal conflicts were common for much longer. War is part of our history. It shaped who we are." "All species fight," Rilke said dismissively. "The Velnorians conquered our corner of the galaxy through military strength. This is not impressive." Monroe looked at Rilke with calm eyes. "The difference, Sub-Commander, is that most of our wars were against each other. Human against human. Nation against nation. Sometimes brother against brother." Varax stopped before a painting showing two armies facing each other across a grassy field. Both sides wore different colors, but they were clearly the same species. The same small, fragile creatures. "Civil War," Monroe explained. "One of many in our history. This particular conflict lasted 4 years and killed over 600,000 humans. Families were divided. Friends became enemies. When it ended, the survivors had to learn to live together again." Varax stared at the painting. 600,000 dead, and they had done it to themselves. The concept was difficult to process. Velnorians had never fought a civil war. The idea of turning their weapons against their own kind was unthinkable. "How did your species survive such violence?" he asked. Monroe's answer was simple. "We always do." They moved deeper into the museum. The artifacts became more modern, more deadly. Varax saw weapons that could kill from great distances, explosives that could level buildings, vehicles designed for nothing but destruction. And with each display, the numbers grew larger. They stopped before a wall covered with photographs from something called the Second World War. Monroe spoke in a quiet voice, almost reverent. This conflict lasted 6 years and involved most of the nations on Earth. When it ended, over 70 million humans were dead. Cities were destroyed. Entire populations were displaced. It was the deadliest war in our history. Varax felt his throat tighten. 70 million. The number was staggering. The Velnorians had fought wars that killed millions over the course of centuries. Humans had done it in 6 years. Against themselves. "How is this possible?" he asked. "How did you not destroy yourselves completely?" Monroe turned to face him. Her expression remained calm, but her eyes held something Varax had not expected. Not pride, not shame. Something closer to acceptance. "We came close," she admitted. "More than once. But humans are good at surviving. We adapt. We rebuild. We remember our mistakes, even when we repeat them." She gestured to the wall of photographs. "Every cadet at this academy studies these wars. Not to celebrate them, but to understand them. We learn what humans are capable of, both the terrible and the heroic. We carry that knowledge with us." Varax moved along the wall, studying the images. He saw soldiers in muddy trenches, their faces hollow with exhaustion. He saw cities reduced to rubble, smoke rising from the ruins. He saw lines of prisoners, civilians fleeing with whatever they could carry, children standing alone amid destruction. And then he saw something else. Soldiers helping wounded enemies. Medics treating prisoners with the same care as their own people. Communities rebuilding, stone by stone. Former enemies shaking hands, signing treaties, becoming allies. You forgave each other, Barak said. After all that death, you forgave the ones who caused it. We had to, Monroe said. The alternative was eternal war. Humans learned that destroying your enemy completely is not always possible. Sometimes you have to find another way. Sometimes the ones you fought beside become the ones you fight against, and then beside again. They entered the memorial hall. The room was circular, with high ceilings and soft lighting. The walls were covered with names, thousands upon thousands of names, carved into stone panels that reached from floor to ceiling. Every name you see belongs to a graduate of this academy who died in service, Monroe explained. This is only one wall of many. The full list is much longer. Thorax walked slowly along the wall, his four eyes moving across the endless rows of names. Each name was a life, a family, a story that ended too soon. He tried to count them but gave up quickly. There were too many. Your species sends its young to die willingly, he said, and you honor them for it. We honor their sacrifice, Monroe corrected. They did not want to die. No one wants to die. But they believed something was worth dying for. That belief is what we honor. Rilke had been silent for some time. When she spoke, her voice had lost some of its edge. What could possibly be worth so many deaths? Monroe looked at her directly. Freedom, family, home, the people they loved, the future they wanted their children to have. She paused. Humans do not fight because we enjoy it, Subcommander. We fight because we have things we refuse to lose. Thorax reached out and touched one of the carved names. The stone was cold under his fingers. He thought about his own species, about the wars they had fought for territory and resources and power. They had killed millions too, but they had never honored the dead like this. They had never built temples to remember ordinary soldiers. A small plaque caught his attention near the exit. It held a short phrase in human language. His translator rendered it as, "The only easy day was yesterday." What does this mean? He asked. Monroe stood beside him. It means that every day brings new challenges, new hardships. Humans do not expect life to be easy. We do not plan for comfort. We prepare for struggle, because struggle is all we have ever known. Thorax read the words again. The only easy day was yesterday. It was such a simple phrase, yet it carried weight he had not expected. This was a species that did not hope for peace. They prepared for war while building monuments to its cost. You are a strange species, Thorax said finally. Monroe allowed herself a small smile. We know. As they left the memorial hall, Thorax found his thoughts troubled. He had come here expecting to find primitives playing at soldiers. Instead, he had found something else entirely. A species that had nearly destroyed itself multiple times, yet refused to die. A species that honored its dead not as heroes of conquest, but as sacrifices for something greater than themselves. He was beginning to understand why the High Council was concerned about humans. And he was beginning to share that concern. The Combat Simulation Center was located beneath the Academy grounds. They took an elevator deep underground, passing through multiple security checkpoints, before arriving at a vast chamber filled with technology Thorax did not recognize. Screens covered the walls, showing maps and data streams. Human technicians moved between stations, monitoring equipment and speaking in quick, clipped sentences. Sergeant Kevin Brooks met them at the entrance. He was older than the other humans Varax had encountered, with gray hair and a face marked by scars. His eyes were hard, and he moved with the careful precision of someone who had spent a lifetime in combat zones. "Fleet Commander," he said with a nod. "Welcome to where we separate the soldiers from the pretenders." Commander Carter had excused himself for other duties, leaving Varax and Rilke in the sergeant's care. Varax found himself studying the human veteran with new interest. This was not a soft creature who had never seen blood. This was a predator wearing a uniform. "You run the combat simulations?" Varax asked. "I designed them," Brooks replied. "I've spent 30 years fighting across 6 different star systems. I know what war looks like, and I make sure these cadets know too before they ever see real combat." They were led to an observation platform overlooking a large holographic arena. Below, a squad of 10 cadets was preparing for an exercise. They checked their weapons, adjusted their gear, and spoke quietly among themselves. Varax recognized one of them as Cadet Nathan Pierce, the senior cadet Carter had mentioned earlier. He was tall for a human, with broad shoulders and calm eyes. "Today's scenario is simple," Brooks explained. "The cadets will face a simulated invasion force. They will be outnumbered 5-1. Their objective is to defend a civilian population center until reinforcements arrive." Rilke frowned. 5-1? That seems excessive. You are setting them up to fail." Brooks smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Failure is the best teacher, Sub-Commander. Anyone can win a fair fight. I want to see what they do when the odds are against them." The simulation began. The arena transformed into a ruined cityscape, buildings crumbling and fires burning in the distance. The cadets spread out immediately, taking defensive positions without needing orders. They moved like a single organism, each one knowing exactly where the others would be. The enemy appeared moments later. Holographic soldiers poured through the streets, advancing in waves. They were modeled after a generic alien species, vaguely humanoid, but clearly not human. Varax noted they were using Volnorian tactical formations. "You base the enemy on our military?" he asked. Brooks did not look away from the battle. "Among others, we train against every known threat." The first wave hit the cadet positions hard. Gunfire erupted across the arena. 2 cadets fell in the opening moments, their simulation suits marking them as casualties. The remaining 8 pulled back, tightening their perimeter around a building marked as the civilian shelter. Varax expected them to hold position and wait for rescue. Instead, Cadet Pierce gathered his squad and began giving orders. Within seconds, they had abandoned their defensive line and were moving through the ruins, circling around the advancing enemy. "What are they doing?" Rilke asked. "They should hold their ground." "Watch," Brooks said quietly. The cadets split into 2 groups. One group, led by Pierce, moved east through the rubble. The other group, led by a small female cadet, moved west. They were abandoning the civilians they were supposed to protect. Then Varax understood. The eastern group opened fire on the enemy flank, drawing attention away from the shelter. The enemy turned to engage them, believing the main human force was exposed. But it was a trap. The western group emerged behind enemy lines. They moved silently, taking out communication officers and squad leaders with precise shots. The enemy formation began to collapse as units lost contact with their commanders. Confusion spread through their ranks. Pierce's group retreated, pulling the enemy further from the shelter. They gave ground slowly, making the enemy fight for every meter. Meanwhile, the western group continued to cut through the enemy's command structure like a blade through cloth. They changed their strategy completely, Varax observed. The original plan failed, so they created a new one. Brooks nodded. "Humans are adaptable. Put us in a box, and we will find a way out. Block one path, and we will find another. You cannot predict this because we do not follow rules. A cadet in the Western group suddenly stepped into the open. She was immediately targeted by multiple enemy units. Instead of retreating, she held her position and returned fire, drawing more attention to herself. Varax watched in confusion as she was hit multiple times, her simulation suit flashing red. She sacrificed herself, he said. She created an opportunity, Brooks corrected. Watch what happens next. The enemy, focused on the exposed cadet, failed to notice Pierce's group moving into position behind them. The ambush was devastating. Within seconds, the enemy's rear guard was eliminated. Pierce pressed forward, and his squad cut through the remaining forces with brutal efficiency. The simulation ended with the enemy defeated, and the civilian shelter secured. 6 of the 10 cadets had been marked as casualties. But they had won. 60% losses, Varax said. In Velnorian military doctrine, that would be considered a failure. Brooks turned to face him. In Velnorian doctrine, maybe. But the civilians survived. The position was held. The mission was completed. That cadet who exposed herself knew exactly what she was doing. She chose to give her squadmates a chance to win. And if she had been wrong, if her sacrifice had been meaningless, then she would have died trying anyway. Brooks crossed his arms. Humans do not surrender easily, Fleet Commander. When we fight all the way. There is no halfway. There is no acceptable loss. We either win or we die trying, and even then we make sure the enemy bleeds for it. Varax watched the cadets below as they reset for another exercise. They moved with easy confidence, joking with each other despite the simulated deaths they had just experienced. The cadet who had sacrificed herself was laughing at something her squadmate said. I have a question, Varax said. What happens if you give them a scenario they cannot win? A situation where victory is truly impossible. Brooks was silent for a long moment. When he answered, his voice was quiet but certain. They find a way anyway. Human history is filled with battles we should have lost. Outnumbered, outgunned, surrounded. And somehow, we survive. We win. Not always, but often enough that our enemies have learned to be afraid of us. And if victory is truly impossible, if there is no chance at all, Brooks met his eyes. Then they make sure the enemy pays for every inch. They fight until they cannot fight anymore, and then they find one more reason to keep fighting. I have seen soldiers hold positions with no ammunition, fighting with knives, with rocks, with their bare hands. I have seen wounded men drag themselves toward the enemy because they refused to die lying down. Varax felt something cold settle in his stomach. It was not fear exactly. It was closer to recognition. He had faced dangerous enemies before, species with advanced technology and superior numbers. But he had never faced an enemy that simply refused to accept defeat. Your species is terrifying, he said finally. Brooks laughed, but it was a harsh sound. We know, Fleet Commander. We have been terrifying each other for thousands of years. The difference now is that we have finally found something else to point our weapons at. Below, the cadets were lining up for another simulation. Another impossible scenario. Another chance to die. And every single one of them was smiling. That evening, Varax requested a private meeting with the Academy's commanding officer. He needed answers. The things he had witnessed throughout the day had shaken something deep inside him, and he could no longer pretend otherwise. Rilke wanted to accompany him, but he ordered her to remain in their quarters. Some conversations needed to happen alone. General Marcus Webb received him in a simple office overlooking the Academy grounds. The room was decorated with maps and photographs, medals and certificates, the collected memories of a long military career. Webb himself was an older human with white hair and a face lined by decades of service. He moved slowly but with purpose, and his eyes held the same cold clarity Varax had seen in the combat veterans. "Please sit, Fleet Commander," Webb said, gesturing to a chair. "I understand you have questions." Varax lowered himself into the seat, which was too small for his frame. He did not complain. Comfort seemed trivial now. "I came here expecting to find weaklings," Varax admitted. "My superior sent me to confirm that humans pose no real threat to the Velnorian Dominion. They believed your species was young, inexperienced, soft." Webb poured 2 glasses of amber liquid and offered one to Varax. "And what do you believe now?" Varax took the glass but did not drink. "I believe we have made a serious mistake in our assessment." Webb sat across from him and took a slow sip of his drink. "I appreciate your honesty, Commander. Most species take longer to reach that conclusion. Usually, they have to fight us first." "Tell me about human military doctrine," Varax said. "Not the tactics or the strategies. Tell me about the philosophy. What drives your species to fight?" Webb considered the question for a moment. "Humans fight for many reasons. Territory, resources, ideology, pride. But at our core, we fight to protect our families, our homes, our way of life. When those things are threatened, we become something different. Different how? We have a concept called total war," Webb explained. "It means committing every available resource to victory. No half measures. No compromise. When humans decide something is worth fighting for, we do not stop until the threat is eliminated completely. Not pushed back. Not contained. Eliminated." Varax thought about the Velnorian military philosophy. They fought for expansion, for glory, for the continuation of the Dominion. But there were always limits. Always lines they would not cross. Always a point where the cost became too high and withdrawal became acceptable. "You are saying humans have no such limits," he said. Webb's expression was calm. "I am saying that when you threaten the things we love, we lose the ability to see limits. History has shown this many times. Push a human far enough, and you create something that does not know how to stop. That seems dangerous. For everyone, including yourselves." "It is," Webb agreed. "We have done terrible things to each other. Atrocities that still haunt us. But that same capacity for destruction has also been our salvation. Every time our species faced extinction, we found a way to survive. We adapted. We endured. We became harder, stronger, more determined." Varax finally took a sip of the drink. It burned his throat, but he did not show discomfort. "Tell me about human endurance. Your species is physically weaker than many others. How do you compete?" Webb leaned back in his chair. "Let me tell you about some of our history. Humans have crossed frozen wastelands on foot, surviving temperatures that would kill most species. We have walked across deserts without water, driven by nothing but willpower. We have fallen from great heights, been shot, stabbed, burned, and still continued fighting." He pulled a small device from his desk and projected an image onto the wall. It showed a human soldier covered in wounds, still holding a weapon. "This man was shot 17 times during a battle," Webb said. "He continued fighting for another 20 minutes before his body finally gave out. His last words were asking about the status of his squad." Another image appeared. A different soldier, missing an arm, firing a weapon with his remaining hand. This one lost his arm to an explosion. He used his belt as a tourniquet, picked up his rifle, and held his position for 6 hours until reinforcements arrived. When asked why he did not retreat, he said he could not leave his friends behind. Varax stared at the images. These were not exceptional cases presented to impress him. He could tell from Webb's tone that such stories were common among humans. They expected this level of sacrifice from each other. "What do humans fear most in war?" Varax asked. Webb turned off the projector and met his eyes. losing our families, threaten our homes, and we become something else entirely. Something primal. Something that does not think about casualties or logistics or acceptable losses. We think only about making sure the threat never comes back. There was a long silence. Varax understood what the general was telling him, even if the words were polite. This was a warning. A gentle one, dressed in the language of cultural exchange, but a warning nonetheless. The Volnorian Dominion has been testing human borders, Varax said carefully. Small incursions. Probing attacks. Nothing official. Webb nodded slowly. Yes, we know. You know? We have known for some time, Commander. We track every ship that enters our territory, whether it announces itself or not. We monitor communications across half the galaxy. We know exactly what the Dominion has been doing. Varax felt his blood chill. Then why have you not responded? Webb smiled, and for the first time, Varax saw something cold beneath the human's calm exterior. Because we are patient. Because we wanted to see if the Dominion was wise enough to stop on their own. Because we hoped this cultural exchange might help your leaders understand what they were dealing with before things went too far. And if we do not stop, Webb's smile faded. Then we will respond in a way the Dominion will not forget. Not with matched force. Not with proportional retaliation. We will respond in a way that ensures no one ever thinks about threatening human space again. Varax set down his glass. His hand was trembling slightly, though he tried to hide it. You would risk war? Against a civilization with more ships, more soldiers, more resources? Webb stood and walked to the window. He looked out at the academy grounds, at the cadets still training in the evening darkness, their shapes moving through exercise courses lit by floodlights. Fleet Commander, let me be clear. We do not want war. Humans are tired of war. We have seen too much of it. But if war comes to us, we will not lose. He turned back to face Varax. Your Dominion has 10 times our ships, 100 times our resources. But you have never fought a species like us. You have never faced an enemy that simply refuses to die. All species say such things. Yes, but most of them are lying. Webb walked back to his chair and sat down heavily. I have read the reports on Volnorian conquests. Impressive victories against species with advanced technology and large populations. But every one of those species eventually surrendered. They accepted defeat. They recognized when they were beaten. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on Varax. Humans do not surrender, Commander. We do not recognize defeat. You can burn our cities and kill our soldiers and destroy everything we have built. And we will keep fighting. From the ruins. From the shadows. From the last bunker with the last bullet. We will keep fighting until there is nothing left of us or nothing left of you. Varax wanted to dismiss this as boasting. Every species believed they were special. But something in Webb's voice told him this was not boasting. This was a simple statement of fact, delivered without pride or anger. Just truth. You are trying to scare me, Varax said. Webb shook his head. No, Commander. I am trying to educate you. There is a difference. Fear fades. Understanding lasts. He finished his drink and set the glass aside. Go back to your Dominion. Tell them what you learned here, and pray they are wise enough to listen. Varax stood. There was nothing more to say. He had his answers, and they were worse than anything he had imagined. Thank you for your honesty, General, he said. Webb nodded. Safe travels, Fleet Commander. And remember what I said. We do not want war, but we are very, very good at it. Varax left the office and walked back to his quarters through the quiet academy grounds. Above him, human stars shone in an unfamiliar sky. Somewhere out there, his fleet waited to carry him home. He had never been so eager to leave a planet behind. And he had never been so afraid of what his report might mean for his people. The Valnorian command vessel hung in the darkness beyond Earth's orbital stations. Vorax stood at the viewport of his personal quarters, watching the blue planet shrink as they moved toward the jump point. He had not spoken since boarding the shuttle. Rilke tried to engage him in conversation, but he had waved her away with a gesture that left no room for argument. 3 days later, they arrived at the Valnorian homeworld. The towering cities of his people rose from the purple plains like monuments to their superiority. Ships filled the skies, a constant reminder of the Dominion's power. Varax had once looked upon these sights with pride. Now they seemed fragile, temporary. Rilke finally cornered him in the corridor outside his quarters. Her patience had reached its limit. "Commander, you have barely spoken since we left Earth. What happened in your meeting with the human general? What did he say to you?" Vorax stopped walking. He looked at his young aide, at her confident posture and dismissive eyes. She still believed humans were primitives. She still thought the Dominion was untouchable. "They told me the truth," Vorax said simply. "And the truth was not what I expected." "What truth?" "They are smaller than us. Weaker. Their technology is inferior. Their empire is barely 2 centuries old, while ours spans millennia." Vorax placed a hand on her shoulder. "Rilke, let me tell you what I learned. Not what I expected to learn, but what I actually witnessed." They walked together through the corridors of the command vessel. Vorax spoke slowly, carefully choosing his words. "I saw cadets, children really, fighting with their bare hands. Not because they lacked weapons, but because they wanted to be dangerous, even without them. I saw them train until their bodies broke, then get up and train more. Stubbornness is not strength," Rilke argued. "I saw their history," Vorax continued. "They killed 70 million of their own kind in a single war that lasted 6 years. 6 years, Rilke. We have never lost that many in our entire existence. They did it to themselves, and then they rebuilt and moved on." Rilke was silent. "I saw their memorial walls, covered with the names of young soldiers who died for causes they believed in. Not commanders, not generals. Ordinary soldiers, honored as heroes because they chose to sacrifice themselves for others." "Sentimentality," Rilke said. But her voice was uncertain now. "I saw a combat simulation where cadets faced impossible odds. They lost 60% of their force, and they considered it a victory because the mission was completed. One of them deliberately exposed herself to enemy fire so her squad mates could win. She knew she would die. She did it anyway. They reached the bridge of the command vessel. Officers moved at their stations, monitoring systems and preparing for the final approach to the homeworld. Vorax looked at them, at their efficiency and discipline, and wondered how they would fare against enemies who simply refused to give up. "The humans know about our border probes," Vorax said quietly. "They have known for some time. They were waiting to see if we would stop." Rilke's eyes widened. "They know? And they did nothing?" "They are patient. They wanted to give us a chance to be wise." Vorax turned to face her. "Do you understand what that means? They were not afraid of our probes. They were curious. They were watching to see what kind of species we were." The command vessel docked at the orbital station above the homeworld. Vorax was escorted directly to the High Council chamber, where the leaders of the Valnorian Dominion waited to hear his report. The chamber was vast, with seats arranged in a circle around a central platform. 12 council members, the most powerful beings in the Dominion, looked down at him with expectant eyes. Fleet Commander Vorax Thelm, the first counselor, announced, "You were sent to assess the human military. Deliver your report." Vorax stepped onto the central platform. He had rehearsed this moment many times during the journey home. He had considered softening his message, making it more palatable. In the end, he decided the council needed to hear the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. Honored council, he began. I was sent to evaluate whether humans pose a threat to the Dominion. My conclusion is simple. Do not provoke them. Do not threaten their worlds. Do not give them a reason to turn their attention toward us. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The third counselor, a military veteran himself, leaned forward. Explain yourself, Commander. The humans are technologically inferior. Their fleet is a fraction of ours. Their technology will improve, Varax replied. Their fleet will grow, but those are not the reasons to fear them. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I fear them because of what they are, not what they have. He told them everything. The centuries of warfare, the millions dead, the history of self-inflicted devastation followed by impossible recovery. He described the cadets who trained until they broke and then trained more. He explained the concept of total war, of a species that did not know how to surrender. They have perfected the art of killing their own kind, Varax said. For thousands of years, they practiced on each other. Every tactic, every strategy, every weapon was first tested in human blood. They only recently learned to point that violence outward. We do not want to be the reason they remember how good they are at war. The chamber was silent. Council members exchanged glances, uncertain how to respond. Finally, the seventh counselor spoke. You speak as if they are invincible. No species is invincible. I do not claim they are invincible, Varax replied. I claim they are relentless. There is a difference. We could defeat them in battle. We could destroy their fleets and burn their worlds. But we would never truly win. They would keep fighting. From the ruins. From the shadows. They would make us pay for every victory until the cost became unbearable. This is speculation, the third counselor said. Fear-mongering? It is observation, Varax countered. I watched their children train to die for strangers. I heard their veterans describe wounds that would kill any Valnorian, wounds they survived through nothing but willpower. I looked into their eyes, council members, and I saw something I have never seen in any other species we have conquered. And what was that? Varax took a deep breath. Acceptance. They accept that war is part of their existence. They do not hope for peace. They prepare for conflict while praying it never comes. And when it does come, they are ready. Not just physically, but mentally, spiritually. They are ready to sacrifice everything and expect nothing in return. The first counselor raised a hand for silence. The chamber fell quiet. What do you recommend, Commander? Varax met the first counselor's eyes. End the border provocations immediately. Open formal diplomatic channels. Treat them as equals, not as inferiors to be tested. And most importantly, never give them a reason to see us as enemies. You would have us show weakness to a species we could crush? I would have us show wisdom, Varax said. The Dominion has survived for millennia because we know when to fight and when to avoid conflict. The humans are not prey, council members. They are predators who have only recently stopped hunting each other. Do not awaken that instinct against us. The council deliberated for several hours. Varax waited in an adjacent chamber, uncertain of the outcome. When he was finally called back, the first counselor delivered the verdict. The council has voted. Border provocations will cease. Diplomatic relations will be formalized. The humans will be treated as a sovereign power, not a potential conquest. Varax bowed his head in relief. The council is wise. Later that evening, Rilke found him on the observation deck, staring at the stars. She stood beside him in silence for a long moment. May I ask you something, Commander? Speak. Of everything you witnessed on Earth, what frightened you most? Their weapons? Their history? Their willingness to sacrifice? Varax considered the question. He thought about the cadets training in the darkness, the names on the memorial wall, the quiet certainty in General Webb's eyes. It was the cadets, he said finally. Children, really. Barely adults by human standards. And every single one of them was ready to die for people they would never meet. They trained for it. They accepted it. They smiled about it. He turned to face Rilke. That kind of species does not lose wars, Sub-Commander. They may suffer. They may bleed. They may be reduced to almost nothing. But they survive. They always survive. And I realized something as I watched them. What? We are the lucky ones, Varak said. We met them as potential friends. Other species will not be so fortunate. Someday, somewhere, someone will threaten what humans love. And when that day comes, the galaxy will learn why Earth produced a species that fears nothing except losing the things they cherish. He looked back at the stars, at the distant light of Earth's sun, barely visible among millions of others. I am glad I will not live to see that day, he said quietly, because I do not think anyone will be ready for what happens next. Rilke had no response. They stood together in silence, watching the stars. And for the first time in her life, she understood why her commander had returned from Earth, a changed being. Humans were not primitives to be conquered. They were a warning to be heeded. And the Volnorian Dominion, for once, was wise enough to listen.